What Jasmine Crockett revealed inside that courtroom may have changed American democracy forever. But what happened after she left? No one saw coming. The grand chamber of the Supreme Court glowed under bright lights as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood in the center, her striking red suit blazing against the marble walls. Across from her sat Chief Justice John Roberts, his expression firm, his voice echoing when he suddenly interrupted. "Congresswoman, that will be enough." The command cut through the room like thunder. Whispers swept through the audience, journalists, aides, and spectators trading shocked looks. But Crockett didn't flinch. She held her notes tightly, her heart racing but her eyes steady. Facing the nation's most powerful jurist, she stood tall and unshaken. Roberts, with nearly 2 decades leading the Supreme Court and the confidence of a lifetime appointment, seemed sure he could silence this first-term representative from Texas. But Crockett, a former civil rights lawyer with years of courtroom experience, saw this as something bigger than herself. It was a moment to defend the Constitution itself. She lifted her chin and spoke clearly. "With all respect, Mr. Chief Justice, the Constitution does not grant you the power to silence an elected member of Congress speaking on voting rights." The room froze. Even Roberts paused, caught off guard by her direct constitutional challenge. This wasn't a routine legal argument anymore. It was a clash between democracy and authority, Congress and the court, a confrontation that would shake Washington. As the murmurs faded, the courtroom clerk announced, "The court recognizes Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett as amicus curiae." Roberts nodded stiffly, reminding her that she had 10 minutes. His tone carried authority, a warning disguised as courtesy. Crockett stepped forward slowly, her red suit glowing under the lights. At just 42, the new Congresswoman from Dallas carried the confidence of someone who had spent her life defending constitutional rights. "Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court," she began. "I am here not only as a lawmaker, but as someone who has seen how voting restrictions silence communities across Texas and across America." Her voice filled the room, deep and steady. "This case isn't just about procedure," she continued. "It's about whether we still honor the promise that every American deserves equal access to vote." Chief Justice Roberts shifted slightly in his chair, his eyes narrowing. The case, Williams versus Texas Election Commission, had been expected to be a quiet hearing about voter ID rules. But with Crockett's arrival, it had turned into a national spectacle. She gestured toward the framed Constitution on the courtroom wall. "When this court weakened the Voting Rights Act in Shelby County, we were told other protections remained," she said. "Yet here we are, facing the same voter suppression the VRA was created to stop." A hush fell over the crowd. Roberts leaned forward, his microphone picking up his breath. This wasn't law anymore. It was history unfolding. The air inside the Supreme Court chamber was electric. You could almost feel the tension crackle through the marble walls as Crockett continued her argument. She stood firm at the podium, flipping through her notes as she spoke. "The Texas law before you," she said, "creates barriers that fall hardest on Black and Latino voters, my constituents. And the data is undeniable." Her voice stayed calm, but every word landed like a hammer. When nearly 23% of Black Texans lack the required ID, compared to just 4.7% of white Texans, that is not neutrality, she declared. That is a modern-day poll tax. The words hit the courtroom like a shockwave. Reporters typed furiously, justices exchanged glances, and the tension grew. Roberts' jaw tightened. For years, he had avoided direct discussions of race in these hearings. But Crockett's facts left no room to hide. "Congresswoman," Roberts interrupted sharply, "please limit your remarks to the legal issues before us." It was a warning, stay in the lines. But Crockett wasn't one to retreat. "Mr. Chief Justice," she replied firmly, "the legal question is whether this law violates the 14th and 15th Amendments. We cannot answer that without examining these racial disparities." The gallery murmured. Even Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson leaned forward, visibly drawn into Crockett's argument. "When elderly veterans who served this nation for decades lose the right to vote," Crockett continued, "we are witnessing a constitutional emergency." Roberts struck his gavel, trying to regain control. But it was clear, the courtroom wasn't his anymore. The moment had turned. A freshman Congresswoman was standing toe-to-toe with the Chief Justice of the United States, refusing to be silenced. Reporters in the back began typing headlines even before the hearing ended. Showdown at the Supreme Court. Crockett confronts Roberts. But she wasn't finished yet. "Mr. Chief Justice," she said, holding up a chart, "look at the counties where Black and Latino communities are largest. Fewer DMV hours. Longer lines. No public transit nearby. This isn't coincidence. It's design." Roberts shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable as cameras zoomed in. For years, he had framed voting laws as neutral. But Crockett was forcing a national audience to see the truth, that neutral laws can still create racial inequality. "Congresswoman," Roberts interrupted again, his tone sharper now, "please explain what constitutional standard you believe applies." It was an attempt to steer the conversation back into technical, narrow legal language. But Crockett wasn't falling for it. She paused, took a sip of water, then nodded calmly. "Mr. Chief Justice, under Arlington Heights and under the remaining protections of the Voting Rights Act," she said, "a discriminatory effect combined with historic patterns triggers strict scrutiny." Her precision silenced the room. Even some of the skeptical justices looked impressed. "Precedent only matters when it's genuinely used," she continued. "In Brnovic, this court recognized discriminatory impact, yet upheld the law. I'm explaining why this case demands a different constitutional result." The murmurs grew again. Crockett had just cited one of the court's most controversial voting rights rulings, and challenged its logic directly to the Chief Justice's face. Justice Elena Kagan nodded thoughtfully. Justice Samuel Alito narrowed his eyes. The ideological divide was visible, and widening. Then Roberts spoke again, voice tight with irritation. "Congresswoman Crockett, we decide cases on constitutional law, not political preference. Please continue." It was a slip, a defensive tone that instantly shifted the energy of the room. Crockett nodded slowly, then raised a folder. "Then let me show you how constitutional principles operate in reality," she said. Her aide handed copies of sworn affidavits to the justices. Real stories of Texans denied their right to vote. This was no longer theory. It was real life. The rustle of paper filled the courtroom as justices flipped through the affidavits. Each document carried the story of an American citizen, a veteran, a nurse, a student, all turned away from the ballot box for reasons that seemed minor but carried deep injustice. One read, "Denied because my license had expired, even though I showed my voter registration card." Another said, "I was told my student ID didn't count. I never got to vote." Crockett let the silence do the work. Then she spoke, slowly, deliberately. "These aren't hypotheticals. These are Americans. And the Constitution protects them." Her tone was steady, but her words carried weight, the kind that can shake the foundations of power. "The 15th Amendment doesn't ask for perfection," she said. "It demands protection." Roberts leaned back, his expression unreadable. Around him, the justices absorbed every word. "When laws have the effect of excluding entire communities," Crockett continued, "it is this court's duty to recognize that equality is not merely written, it must be practiced." Justice Sotomayor nodded slightly. Justice Kavanaugh, sitting beside her, glanced down at his notes but didn't look up. Then, Crockett reached into her folder again, and held up a single page. It was an internal memo from the Texas Election Commission, recently uncovered by her staff. "This document," she said, "shows that state officials knew the law would disproportionately affect minority voters, and passed it anyway." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Even Roberts looked startled. "Congresswoman, that memo is not part of the official record," he said quickly. Crockett turned toward him. "Then let it be entered into the record today," she replied. "Because the truth deserves to be seen, even when it's inconvenient." Cameras flashed. The hearing room erupted with noise until Roberts struck his gavel sharply. "Order! This chamber will come to order." But the order had already been broken. For the first time, the public was seeing what few had dared to expose, that voter suppression wasn't just a political tactic. It was a deliberate, Systemic act. Crockett steadied herself, knowing the risk. She had just challenged one of the most powerful institutions in the country. Live, on record, before the world. This memo proves intent, she said firmly. And under the 14th Amendment, intent matters. Her words cut through the noise. Even the conservative justices fell silent. For years, the court had danced around the question of intent, claiming to focus on the effects of laws instead. But Crockett had just placed a written confession before them. Justice Kagan leaned toward her microphone. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said carefully, "are you suggesting that this document demonstrates racial motive?" Crockett nodded. "Yes, Justice Kagan. I am suggesting it shows knowledge, acceptance, and implementation of racial bias, in violation of both the 14th and 15th Amendments." Her voice trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer gravity of what she had done. Across the room, Roberts took a slow breath. The hearing had slipped beyond his control, and he knew it. The story wasn't about a law anymore. It was about truth, power, and the people's right to be heard. The courtroom had turned into a pressure cooker. Every camera light, every breath, every glance was fixed on Jasmine Crockett, the Congresswoman who had just challenged the nation's highest court, with evidence. Chief Justice Roberts stared down at the memo, his lips pressed into a thin line. The seal of the Texas Election Commission gleamed faintly under the courtroom lights. "Congresswoman," he said cautiously, "are you aware of the implications of submitting an unreleased government document into a Supreme Court hearing?" Crockett nodded without hesitation. "I am, Mr. Chief Justice. But I'm also aware of the implications of ignoring it." Her words landed like thunder. Justice Clarence Thomas leaned toward his microphone, voice cool and detached. "And how exactly did you obtain this document, Congresswoman?" Crockett didn't blink. "Through legal channels and protected sources," she said firmly. "Whistleblowers who still believe in the rule of law." A sharp murmur ran through the audience. Washington insiders would later describe that moment as a political earthquake. This wasn't just about Texas anymore. It was about the integrity of democracy itself. Reporters were already rushing to send updates to their networks. Cable news banners flashed breaking headlines within minutes. Crockett reveals secret memo at Supreme Court. Justice Roberts confronted over voter suppression evidence. Inside the chamber, Roberts tried to steady the proceedings. "This court does not litigate media headlines," he said sternly. "We deal in law and evidence." Crockett's response came quietly, but every syllable struck deep. "Then let's deal in evidence, Mr. Chief Justice. Because that's exactly what I've brought." She lifted the memo again, reading aloud. "Projected impact of voter ID requirements. Statistically significant decline in minority participation, acceptable under current state interest claims." Gasps filled the room. The phrase "acceptable under current state interest claims" echoed like a confession. Even Justice Kavanaugh leaned back, visibly unsettled. Justice Jackson covered her mouth, eyes wide. Crockett looked up from the page. "That's not just negligence," she said. "That's intent, written, calculated, and approved." For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of her words hung over the entire chamber. Then, almost reluctantly, Roberts turned to the clerk. "Enter the document into the supplemental record," he said quietly. The sound of the clerk's pen scratching across the page marked a historic shift, the first time in modern history that a member of Congress had introduced classified state material directly before the Supreme Court. Outside, the nation was already reacting. News anchors interrupted programming. Analysts scrambled to interpret what had just happened. But inside, Crockett stayed calm. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was fighting for history. "The Constitution is not an accessory to power," she said softly. "It's a shield for the powerless." Roberts stared at her for a long moment, then looked down. He didn't respond. And in that silence, the world saw something remarkable. One woman, unshaken, unafraid, holding the Supreme Court accountable to the very words carved above its entrance. Equal justice under law. When the gavel finally struck, signaling the end of the hearing, the chamber was still trembling, not from noise, but from silence. Chief Justice Roberts rose slowly, his expression a mask of control, but his eyes revealed something else, unease. The justices left their seats in silence, one by one, as reporters rushed for the exits. Jasmine Crockett stayed where she was, her hands resting on the podium. The weight of what she had done hadn't fully set in yet. Within minutes, her name was everywhere: CNN, MSNBC, Reuters, BBC, every headline carrying some version of the same story. Crockett stunned Supreme Court with leaked memo. Congresswoman challenges Roberts on constitutional grounds. Whistleblower evidence exposes voting rights breach. By nightfall, her speech had gone viral. Clips of her standing firm against Roberts spread across social media. 10 million views, then 20. People across the country were replaying her words. The Constitution is not an accessory to power. It's a shield for the powerless. In Dallas, supporters gathered outside her district office with candles. In Washington, legal scholars debated whether her evidence could lead to a new voting rights amendment. And inside the halls of Congress, whispers began, quiet at first, then louder. Crockett might have changed everything. But the fight wasn't over. The next morning, the Texas Election Commission issued a statement denying everything. The Department of Justice quietly opened a preliminary review. And somewhere, deep within the Capitol, an anonymous source sent Crockett a message that simply read, "You're not done yet." Crockett looked out her office window, the Capitol dome glowing against the night sky. She knew this battle was only beginning, a war not just for laws, but for the very soul of democracy. "If the truth makes them uncomfortable," she said quietly, "then I'm doing something right." Her words would echo across the nation, through courtrooms, classrooms, and every corner of the internet where people still believed that one voice could challenge power.